My name is Vianney Marroquin, and I finally decided to share an anecdote that belongs not only to me, but also to my husband and two very dear friends of ours, my best friend Lydia and her husband Victor, who were traveling with us by car at that time. By the end, you will understand why this is a delicate story and why I had to get authorization to share it on your channel. I do this to warn people, to let them know that evil is everywhere, and that they should always be careful. It was the year 2017. As I mentioned, we were coming from a couple's trip we took to Cancun. The plane landed in a city about 3 hours away from where we live. We left our car at the airport, and from there, we hit the road to return to our city. It was already past 10 p.m. We were about halfway home, surrounded by complete darkness and nothing but wilderness, when suddenly, my friend and her husband pointed out something they were seeing among the branches. My husband slowed down, and we noticed something moving in the brush. As we got closer, the image of 3 women dressed in black became clearer. They were holding hands, encircling what appeared to be 2 gravestones. Seeing that gave me chills. It's not something you usually see, something truly terrifying. They looked like 3 witches performing some sort of ritual in the middle of nowhere. When they realized we were watching them, they turned and stared at us in such an unsettling way that I can't even describe it. They stared at us without breaking eye contact for a second, with a challenging look, almost as if they were threatening us with their gaze. That's how I felt. I told my husband to speed up because I was really scared and didn't want any trouble or to put ourselves in danger. It was clear that those women were dangerous and had no good intentions. We drove a bit further until they were out of sight. We stopped at a gas station to use the restroom, and while we were there, my friend kept insisting that we should go back, thinking those women might have left, and she wanted to see what they had done there. She was sure they had left some sort of witchcraft at those abandoned graves. My immediate response was no. I really didn't want to go back. I was still very scared. I had the macabre image of those women's stares in my mind. I didn't want to put us in danger, but in the end, I let myself be convinced. I don't even know how I agreed to go back to that place. I told them that if those women were still there, we would leave immediately, long before they could notice our presence, to which everyone agreed. But to my surprise, when we got closer, we saw that they were no longer there. My husband pulled over, and my friend was the first to get out of the car. The gravestones were in plain sight. You didn't have to go deep into the brush to see them. That gave me the confidence to get out of the car too, thinking that if those women returned, I could quickly run back to the car. And I won't lie, I was also very curious. When we arrived, we noticed ashes on top of the gravestones as if something had been burned there. At first glance, we didn't see anything until my friend bent down and pulled something out from among the branches surrounding one of the gravestones. They were witchcraft items. She touched them with her hands, and she was the only one who did. Not even her husband wanted to help her undo those things. I remember one of those items which impacted me the most because it was so disgusting and grotesque. It was a dead pigeon with its chest sewn up, and inside it was a piece of paper and a photo of a woman. My friend opened it with her husband's knife and started to undo everything those macabre women had left at that place. My friend was always very brave, but until that moment, I didn't know the extent of her bravery. Just seeing all that had me trembling, and I couldn't stop hugging my husband. I was very nervous, fearing that those women would return to the place and see us undoing their vile work. I was afraid of what they might do to us, so I started urging my friend to hurry up. Finally, she finished undoing everything she found, which easily amounted to about 5 different witchcraft items. We got back in the car and left immediately. I was truly shocked by everything I had just seen, because among those witchcraft items was a photo of a young girl who couldn't have been more than about 13 years old. I couldn't comprehend how people like that could want to harm a child. It was simply something I couldn't fathom. Although I felt relieved that my friend had undone everything, I didn't know that the worst was yet to come. I knew nothing about witchcraft or anything like that, so I had no idea how dangerous it was to touch a witchcraft item with your bare hands until some time later. My friend suddenly started getting sick. She deteriorated more and more until she had tests done, and it turned out she had cancer, which shocked us all because she was a very healthy person who loved exercising and ate extremely healthily. None of us could understand it. Everything happened overnight. But that wasn't all. In her final days, my friend said something was following her. Her husband told me that she would wake up screaming at night, saying that something was watching her sleep, a figure of a woman who was almost skeletal, with large, completely black eyes. She said she saw that woman every night, even when her husband was with her. And days later, my friend passed away. But according to her husband, Victor, her last days were a living hell. After some time had passed since her death, he told us that he too had seen the figure his wife described. In their last days, there was a horrible vibe in their house. That's when he decided to call a priest, who told them there was something very evil in their house, likely causing everything they were going through. The priest couldn't do much. He just blessed the house, but it didn't help much because the vibe remained just as unbearable. A few days later, my friend passed away. Victor told us that he had talked to his sister about what his wife did that night, and she said that touching those witchcraft items without protection probably brought something back to their home, or turned the witchcraft against her. That's when I became obsessed and started researching the topic extensively, and I was able to confirm what Victor's sister said. I swear, at that moment, I felt so guilty for everything, for agreeing to go back to that place and for letting her touch those things. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't think about it, about the what if, about what would have happened if I had said no, that we wouldn't go back there. It's something I've had to address in therapy because I couldn't handle the guilt without professional help. And after all these years, I decided to share my friend's story, because her story needs to be heard, and perhaps it will help prevent others from going through the same thing. Hello, my name is Ramon, and I'm here to share something truly incredible and to a certain extent chilling that happened to my wife and me. That night we were traveling to Piedras Negras, where my wife is from, to visit her family for Easter. It was the first time we were traveling by car at night since we got delayed due to some work-related issues. As we were driving down the road, my wife was asleep and I was listening to music while driving. Suddenly I saw a man riding a bicycle on the side of the road. What caught my attention was that he had a cart tied behind the bike, and in that cart there was a small girl around 4 years old. I was so surprised that I woke my wife up to see it. She was just as shocked as I was because it was very dangerous for that man to have a baby tied to a bike on the side of the road at that hour. It was something that really grabbed our attention, and my wife was somewhat indignant. She told me to slow down and not to lose sight of them, as she was very worried about the little girl. So we followed this man for a few kilometers. The girl was sitting with her back to us so we could never see her little face. She was sitting still, and the man never looked back, focused on riding his bicycle. Suddenly we saw the man turn onto a path that led into the woods. What struck us as odd was that there were no lights or anything indicating a town or a house nearby, just wilderness. We became concerned for the little girl. My wife told me to stop because she wanted to see where the man was taking the girl. When I parked, my wife got out almost immediately. I ran after her, worried about her safety. The first thing we saw was the man picking some flowers from the cart, but the girl was no longer there. My wife walked towards the man, and when he noticed we were there, he looked at us startled. My wife asked him where the girl was, and the man looked at us with a surprised expression, not knowing what we were talking about. He asked, "What girl?" And my wife responded, "The one sitting in that cart. We followed you the whole time because we were worried about the girl's safety." She asked again where she had gone. The man just took off his hat and started crying out of nowhere. He told us to come closer. I felt confident as he was an elderly man, looking harmless and frail like a grandpa, so I approached him ahead of my wife. He pointed to the ground, where there was a small cross. "That's my granddaughter Aranza. She died here last year in an accident with her mother, and I come to bring her flowers every month," the old man said with a broken voice. My wife and I were stunned. When we read what was written on that cross, we realized it indeed was for a little girl, barely 4 years old. The old man told us that he bought that cart to pull behind his bike for her because she loved riding in it around the ranch where they lived, which was very close by. "If you saw a little girl, that's my little Aranza, who always comes with me everywhere," the man told us. My wife couldn't hold back her tears. She hugged the man, and we offered to take him home as he looked very tired. He accepted, and we put his bike in the back of our truck. His house was about 30 minutes away by car, and when we got to his humble home, he showed us a picture of the girl. Even though we had only seen her from behind, we could recognize that she was indeed the little girl we had seen in the cart. I know it's hard to believe. In fact, if it hadn't happened to us, we might not have believed it ourselves. But when you experience such things, there's nothing you can do to avoid it. Thank you all for listening to our story. Good evening, community. I hope you all are having an excellent night. My name is Jose Luis, originally from Tamaulipas, and I want to share a paranormal experience with you that is both sad and thought-provoking. First of all, I must tell you that I travel every day to my job, which is 2 hours away from my city in northern Tamaulipas. For those from my area, you know the dangers of traveling on these roads at night these days. So I always try to get back quickly as soon as I finish my work to avoid being caught on the road at night. I usually get home around 8:30 p.m., and these days it's already dark at that time, but I still manage to catch some light on the road. However, that night, I got home very late. Unfortunately, because of someone else, we all had to stay a few extra hours at work, but I won't go into details. The point is that by the time I hit the road, it was already 8 p.m., and there was very little daylight left. The night fell in the blink of an eye. I was quite nervous because I have 2 little girls waiting for me at home. I just crossed myself and ventured into that dark road to get home. Everything was fine up to that point. I hadn't seen anything strange or out of the ordinary, although I must say that there were very few cars on the road. At most, I saw 2 cars. All the others were trucks and very few buses, as people know not to travel through those places at night. I reached a toll booth halfway down the road. I always pass through there to take the highway, which is supposedly the safest route. I arrived and immediately pulled up next to one of the booths because there was no one at the others. When I rolled down my window to pay, I noticed a girl standing inside the booth, but she wasn't looking at me. It struck me as very strange because she wasn't doing anything. She was just staring straight ahead, side on to me, but never looked at me. I said, "Good evening," twice to get her attention, but she never turned around. Then I saw a man suddenly appear at the last booth, signaling for me to come over there. I gestured that I was on my way, but when I turned back to the booth next to me, the girl was no longer there. It was something out of a horror movie, but at that moment my adrenaline and worry about getting home quickly took over, as I still had a long way to go. I reached the other booth where the man was, and the first thing he said was, "This is the only booth that's operational at this hour. I apologize." After that, he handed me my receipt, but before I left, I mentioned that there was a girl in the booth where I had initially stopped, which is why I thought it was also open. He laughed nervously and said, "What girl? I'm the only one working right now." I insisted that I swore there was someone there, that I called out to her several times, but she never turned around. The man just stared at me and kept saying no. Since there were no other cars behind me waiting to move forward, the man told me that he had 2 female colleagues working there just 2 weeks ago. However, last week, a truck from a criminal group had taken the young woman who worked at that booth where I had stopped, and to this day no one knows anything about her. That's why the other lady had resigned, and they hadn't found replacements for them yet, so he was working alone. It seemed very sad to hear that, but at the same time, it gave me goosebumps because I imagined what you all are probably thinking. That the young woman they had taken was no longer alive, and she had manifested herself to me. On the way back home, I felt a lump in my throat, but I was still very scared. I kept checking the rearview mirror, thinking that I might suddenly see her sitting in the back seat of my car. I don't know. It left me both very impressed and frightened. That was the first and only time I experienced something paranormal in all the years I've been traveling to and from my work, and I had to share it because I'm a fan of these anecdotes. However, until this happened to me, I was very skeptical and found it hard to believe in these things. Everything changes when it happens to you. I just hope that the family of that young woman finds her soon, and that if she is no longer with us, at least she can be in a place where her family can visit her and bring her flowers. Hello, community. My name is Christian. I'm from northern Mexico, but I prefer not to give my exact location. This way, I feel safer sharing my story, and soon you will understand why. Two cousins of mine, who are my age, and I were traveling on the highway. At that time, we were 22 years old. We were coming back from a short weekend trip to the beach. It was Sunday night, and we had to return because one of my cousins and I had classes at university on Monday. We were about 2 hours away from our city. It was 8 p.m. and it was summer, so the sun was just setting. With each passing minute, we were losing daylight. Suddenly, my cousin who was driving informed us that we were low on gas and needed to refuel urgently, or else we would be stranded on the highway. We scolded him for not telling us earlier. He apologized, explaining that he hadn't noticed because he was caught up in the conversation, and his car was consuming more gas than usual. We had filled up before leaving, so he wasn't worried. We checked the phone map for a gas station, but there wasn't one nearby. The closest one was more than an hour away, almost reaching our city. Finally, I found one 30 minutes away, but we had to take a detour since it was in a very small village along a dirt road. We had no choice but to go there, as it would be more dangerous to be stranded on the highway at night. I directed my cousin to where he needed to turn, and the path looked very eerie. It was deserted, very dark, and we had to drive slowly because the road was rocky. We were all tense, experiencing an inexplicable fear, not of paranormal things, but of the crime that is common in those areas. As we ventured deeper into that seemingly endless road, we suddenly saw an abandoned building. Outside it were several large black trash bags. We found it very strange and watched them with curiosity when suddenly, one of the bags moved. There was something alive inside them. All three of us saw the sudden movement of the bag. We wished we had recorded it. My cousin cursed in fright and slowly began to brakey. I asked him what he was doing and told him not to stop because we were in a dangerous place. But he replied, "What if there is an animal inside the bag? Or several? We have to help them. It's not uncommon for people to throw animals away like trash." My other cousin, sitting in the back, said he wouldn't get out of the car and told us to go if we wanted, but to do it quickly, because we were in a dangerous place, especially given the time. To be honest, I didn't want to get out either. Every sense in my body was telling me not to, and fear often prevents us from making mistakes or being reckless. I wish I had listened to my fear at that moment, but I didn't want to leave my cousin alone, so I got out with him. With the flashlights on our phones, we walked toward the moving bag. The place smelled awful. I told him to only open the bag that was moving and to leave the others as they were. We approached the bag, and I held his phone so he could open it while I illuminated the bag with both phones. But when he opened the bag, hands, feet, and other human body parts spilled out, all severed. There were no animals there, only human body parts. My cousin started vomiting, and I stood there staring at the atrocity, unable to react. It wasn't out of morbid curiosity, believe me. I wanted to run, but I was so shocked I couldn't move. After that, everything became a blur in my mind. I only remember one of my cousins pulling me by the arm and pushing me back into the car. We drove off until we reached the gas station in that nearby village, and that's when I was able to process what my eyes had seen. There I began to cry. My cousin, who had been driving, couldn't drive anymore, so his brother took the wheel. The worst part was that we had to go back the same way because there was no other exit from that place. My cousin drove as fast as he could down that desolate road. I kept my head down, not wanting to see that scene again. I just wanted to get out of there and end that nightmare. I felt a great relief when my cousin said, "We're back on the highway, it's over." But in reality, that phrase only referred to that horrible moment we had to live through because it hasn't truly ended. It left a permanent mark on me. I shouldn't have seen that, and it's something I wouldn't wish on anyone. What we three are sure of is that the bag moved. Something moved sharply inside it. That's why everything happened, and none of us could find an explanation for it. Unfortunately, these things happen more often than we think.